as well as we have a wiki that is full of resources and terms and tips and tricks and all kinds of good things.
Okay, I don't see it. Oh yes, we're good. All right, so now we're ready. You can.
Hey, all right. So let me get back into this. As much as I do enjoy talking about Reddit, let's talk about what we're here to talk about tonight. Hi everyone. As I said briefly, I'm Sam Prue, the accessibility evangelist here at Fable. And Fable is a platform that focuses on connecting you with real users of assistive technology, so that you can integrate the voices of people who use assistive technology and people with disabilities into your entire product lifecycle. But we'll be talking more about that later. Right now, what we're really talking about is why test with users with disabilities at all. And the first sort of point that I was just covering is that automated testing really can only reliably catch 25% of errors. Because what an automated test is looking for is, has a control label or a button label been implemented? Has alt text been created? What it can't tell you is if it's good, if it's been implemented correctly, if the content of it is useful, if it's actually working. As many of you who sort of work from browser to browser and platform to platform probably know, each browser and each platform can be a little bit different. And automated testing sort of doesn't necessarily tell you about all of those things either, that really are about the experience. And that's another one of the big advantages of testing with real actual users, because automated testing doesn't tell you about the experience. When you test with a user of an assistive technology, you're actually getting insight into the real experiences that they're having. And so when you see an error from an automated test, it can be very difficult to prioritize it and to figure out, when should it be fixed? How should it be fixed? What impact is this having on people who actually need accessibility and actually need to use the website? Whereas when you're working with users of assistive technology, you're getting that feedback. You're seeing, oh, they can't properly activate this button because it doesn't have the correct keyboard intercepts, or they can't tell what any of this stuff is because the form labels are non-existent or incorrect, that kind of thing. And working with and understanding the needs of people with disabilities makes products that are better for everyone. I'm sure you've all heard people talk about kind of types of disability, situational disabilities, right? People who are in a loud bar, a loud environment, kind of use captions, as well as deaf folks. And so, it's a feature that helps more than just one person. I'm sure you've probably heard about how dark mode really started off as part of accessibility features and very quickly became something that everyone wanted and something that every app has to support. But really what it gets down to is that working with people with disabilities and understanding the needs of edge cases helps you make apps and websites that are more adaptive and more customizable. And the more adaptive and customizable your app is, the better it behaves in kind of these accessibility situations, the better it will adapt to the needs of everyone. Now, one question that I get a lot, and it's a fair question, is why not just have our QA people test for accessibility like they would test for anything else? Why not just have our developers, whenever they develop a new product, why don't they start the screen reader and the screen magnification tool and give it a quick test and see if it all works? Well, there's a few problems with that. First of all, assistive technology is a learned skill. It's not something that you are an expert at the very first time that you sit down with any piece of assistive technology, whether it be Dragon naturally speaking and learning and knowing all of those dictation commands so well that they become muscle memory, or whether it be a screen reader user who is so familiar with all of their keyboard commands that they don't even have to think about it, or whether it even be someone who's a little bit more intermediate, who has probably spent time in training learning how this is supposed to work, learning what to expect, and learning what to do with the technology. And that's sort of leads into the next sort of part of this, which is that assistive technology is highly customized. If I open my settings panel on my screen reader, there are, first of all, multiple settings panel, but the kind of general settings interface actually has 17 different categories. And in those categories, there's going to be 20 or 30 different settings. And that's just in one particular settings dialog of the application. And every user of assistive technology has customized the technology that they're using to fit their particular needs, because people with disabilities all want to have the most efficient experience that we can and have the best experience that we can based on our needs. And there's no real one size fits all kind of assistive technology. And so if you just switch on, VoiceOver on your Mac, which is built in, and it's really great that it is, or on your phone or wherever, you're using that out of the box setting. And what you're really not getting is the actual experience that people with who use assistive technology on a regular basis are having. And that matters, because native users of assistive technology who have been using this for a long time, we know what works. We know how things should work. We know how things ought to work better. We know how things are expected to work. If you're not kind of a regular user of assistive technology, you may find yourself in a place where the screen reader is doing something and you're thinking, is that what it's supposed to do? Is that what it would normally do? Or is there something wrong with what I've done? And it's real users that can tell you that, and that can give you that information. And of course, another super important part of this is that testing with people with disabilities builds empathy. Because too often accessibility can be seen as something that the lawyers are making you do. But even for companies who have gotten beyond, oh, we got to do it, because legal tells us to do, or because we are required to do it, building empathy helps move accessibility beyond checklists, because we think about WCAG and about all of the kind of Section 508 checklists that we have, and they're great and they're important and they're a foundation to start from, and they give us a direction to go in. But accessibility is not about checklists. Accessibility is about making sure that everyone has a great, functional, efficient, enjoyable experience on your app, on your website, and on your product. And the way that you find that out isn't by following a checklist. The way that you find that out and the way that you design for that is by actually working with users who use assistive technology. And of course, when you're working with users, you get the opportunity to take video, to take recordings, to interview them, to get quotes. And that is really useful for helping everyone in the organization, not just perhaps you, who can sometimes be the one accessibility person in your organization, right? And the one person who's kind of the subject matter expert in this, and everyone else thinks, oh, we don't have to deal with it, it's not our problem. Working with real users can really help you spread that word that accessibility is something that everyone should be doing. Now, I want to return to automated testing just for a couple of minutes, because I talked about automated testing a few minutes ago, and I said that it only catches 25% of the errors, and that it can't tell you about the experience, etc. But automated testing is useful. I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that we should just all test with users with disabilities and we should never do automated testing again. Too often, when automated testing doesn't happen, an app that was particularly usable and perfectly accessible on Thursday will go to being an app that I can't use on Friday morning because my phone updated overnight and there was no accessibility testing done on the app. There was no testing done as part of the deploy pipeline. There was no testing done by anyone to make sure that all of the things that you've learned in your testing from real users are not regressing, and that they're all continuing to work the way that you expect that they work and the way that you hope that they would work. And it's helpful for catching what we sometimes call or think of as low-hanging fruit, right? Is there a button that doesn't have a label? Is there a checkbox that you can't tell what it is? Is there a picture that has no alt text? And we sort of call that low-hanging fruit because it's easy to catch and it's easy to fix, but low-hanging fruit does not mean low impact. If you put me in front of a website that has no labels and no alt text, then the screen reader is just going to say link, 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 button, 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 and I'm completely lost and I have no idea where I am or what anything is supposed to do. And so, of course, how can I give you any insight into how we can make this experience better? Because those low-hanging fruit, getting those fixed, can really have a high impact. At least now I understand how things are supposed to work. But of course, automated testing can't tell you anything about actual experience. It misses the errors that only humans can detect. Too often I see a lot of websites where the alt text says placeholder or to do or add this later. And of course that passes most of the automated testing. And so it's automated testing and doing testing and research and ideation and design that involve real users of assistive technology that go hand in hand in order to make an accessible product. But we've talked a lot about accessibility, about how to make an accessible product, about assistive technology. But to this day, there's still a lot of people who perhaps are not familiar with how screen readers work and are not familiar with sort of what the experience is like for kind of an experienced screen reader user like myself who's been doing this all my life to sort of use a website and to go over a website. So I'm going to do a screen reader demo for everyone tonight. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a website called Bookshare. And I picked that website for a couple of reasons. Number one, because Bookshare right now is very active in the New York area. It is a library that focuses on offering downloadable ebooks to people who cannot read print due to a visual or to some other disability. And so Bookshare is a website that works very closely, as you can imagine, with people with disabilities, and that doesn't just stop at automated testing and automated accessibility. And so as we go through this demo, I'm sort of going to give you some insight as a longtime user, as Fable, we've partnered with them into some of the things that they think about as we go through this user experience, and sort of move our way forward. But before I do that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to stop our screen share, and I'm going to take some questions perhaps, and then I will sort of get ready to reshare the screen with my screen reader audio turned on, as I know you probably all didn't want to hear my screen reader reading every slide to me as it came up on the screen.
Great. So while we're transitioning, so we got one comment and acknowledgement that they really appreciated you use the images from, I think it's disabled in here.
Yeah, they're great. We need more exclusive. We need more inclusive imagery, like kind of stock imagery that can be used. It's so important.
And I want to let everyone know too, I typed it into the chat, but please feel free to type your questions into the chat while the presentation is happening, and also type into the chat if you would like to ask the question yourself or if you would like me to ask the question on your behalf as we go. And also I had a question just on the automated testing tools, like how accessible or do you have any automated testing tools that you think work best with the screen reader, or that, are there ones that don't work well with the screen readers?
It really depends on sort of how you're using them and what you're using them for. So it's really about the interface in front of them, right? Because things like Wave and Axe can come as a browser extension where they say, here, highlight with the mouse and right click on the part of the page that you want to test. Or they can come as like, here, put this URL in and we'll run an audit for you and we'll give you a fully accessible report, right? Or they can come as like a Docker image that'll like run a whole Firefox for you and go through a website and spit out a report. And so it really depends how you're using them. There are certainly ways to use them that are wonderfully accessible, and there are ways to use them that, of course, have their accessibility challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we can just go to the demo. Yeah.
Absolutely. Why don't we do that? I know we're heading up on 7:30 here, so I'm conscious of time. All right, and hopefully now you are seeing this window and probably hearing my screen reader. And the thing that you're probably hearing is a voice that is extremely, extremely fast. And I always like to start out these demos at the speed that I usually use my screen reader at, because a lot of people, when you turn on your screen reader and you have the voice set to sort of an extremely slow rate of speech, that experience you're getting of sort of, oh, it takes forever to listen to everything read out is not the experience that I'm having. I'm so used to my screen reader voice that I can take it kind of upwards of 300, 400 words per minute and understand it perfectly well and not sort of have any problems at all. But for the purposes of this demo, and so that we can all follow along, I will slow it down just a little bit.
Rate 35, rate 30, link skip to main content.
I think that ought to do us. Slowed it down sort of to under half of what it was. So I'm on the Bookshare homepage now.
Status update.
And it would be really nice if the screen reader didn't start talking while I was talking. My apologies. I'm on the Bookshare homepage now, and the first thing I really like to demonstrate to people is how important semantic markup is and how important sort of having buttons and form fields and things correctly labeled is. Because as a screen reader user, I am not going to read this entire web page. I've come here with a goal, and my goal is to search for a book. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press E.
Banner landmark, search keywords, edit title, author or ISBN, search keywords, edit sub.
And that jumps me right to the search keywords field. I knew exactly what I wanted. And because the search keywords was an edit field, not a button or a combo box or something else odd, I was able to get right to where I wanted to be with one key press and not have to sort of worry or to explore the whole page or to do anything like that. So I'll go ahead and type in a search string here.
E-S-E-L-A-K-E-H-A-L-A-K-E. Out of spelling error blank.
And I will go ahead and press enter.
Loading page.
And wait for the page to load, because of course that's the one thing about live
loading
demos.
Complete. Search results bar.
There we go. It's always slower than you expected it would be. So now on the search results page, again, I'm not going to go through this entire page. There's kind of this misconception, oh, what screen reader users do is they tab through everything. I don't do that. What I do is I'm going to just press H to navigate by heading.
Main landmark search results. What format should I choose? Westlake link heading left Westlake Soul link heading Amelia Westlake link head Westlake left parent images of America right Amelia Westlake Kevin McCarthy.
And so as you can see, I'm jumping from heading to heading. I don't have to even stop to read any of this information until I get somewhere that I'm interested in.
The Getaway Car: a Donald Westlake nonfiction miscellany link heading level 2.
Yeah, this sounds interesting. So now I'll stop going by heading. And I will instead cursor down.
Over the course of a 50-year career, Donald E. Westlake published nearly 100 books, including not one but two long.
And so I can read the product description.
John continue on said site setting founded books, book offer and names, letters to friends and sort order combo,
etc.
Refined search edit tracing collecting medals. British Ales the risk British History the year deaths of death. Thousand West Slocum and Westlake Lanes : Slaughter 3 to get the ghetto Kevin Amelia Westlake left Amelia Kevin Mc the Getaway Car.
Press enter on that and load kind of the book page.
Over the heading level 2 link the heading left loading page. The get loading complete. The Getaway Car. No next. No previous links. Ban that links. Link log out. Link Samuel Prowse. Main heading link headers of link at link set download list with 2 items synopsis. And
so what you can then do is you can read the synopsis, and from this page there's a download link. I think I might have picked a book that is only available in the US.
Select the download format.
Oh, there we go. Select it. You can select the download format.
EPUB. Download. Select the download Daisy EPUB. Download loading page.
And it just takes you directly to the download page. But there's a couple of kind of things that I wanted to highlight about this experience. The first one is
main landmark available.
that you actually don't have to go into the page for the book that you're interested in downloading. You can actually select download format, hit download right from the search results. And one of the reasons for that was because as they began testing with real users and learning about what real users wanted from an ebook library, they learned that one of the most important things was time to download an ebook. From going from that, hey, I want to read this particular book, to getting to actually having that book and reading it. And so they began to work to make sure that you didn't have to click through to the ebook page to download it. Originally, when you wanted to download a book, it said, okay, we're gonna, do the watermarks and DRM and whatever we need to do. We'll email you when the book is ready. Now they no longer do that.
Marketing,
when you select the download
alert.
page, what they do is they take you right to your available downloads, and it refreshes instantly so that you can download it as quickly as possible. Another thing that they are doing as they're learning from users who find that, hey, now I've downloaded this EPUB to my computer, what do I do with it now that it's on my computer? Well, this isn't very good. And so again, by working with real users in the ideation and design stage, they learned that what we need to do to have the most accessible ebook library possible is to develop apps for the phone so that people can download it directly to their phone. Now they're working on apps for kind of Amazon and Google devices so that you can actually call your personal assistant and say, hey, I'd like to read this book, and it just starts reading it instantly without having to sort of go through any of these steps. And so these are the things that you can only learn from real users. They're the challenges and the barriers that real users have that you can only learn as you work with them and figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work, figure out maybe what was an accessible and great experience, what you thought was great, but as you test with it, as you develop with it, as you ideate, you realize that maybe it's not so great. And so sort of these things are why working with real users is so important, because you won't find it from averaging out user data, and you won't find it out from just sort of testing with a screen reader yourself, because you won't find any of these kind of experiential barriers. And of course, whenever I demo these screen readers, it's that experience. I am so familiar with moving by heading, all of the hotkeys, moving from C jumps to a combo box, E to an edit field, H by heading. The speed, once these become muscle memory, that I'm able to achieve is basically on an accessible website as fast as anyone else would be able to navigate when I have my voice completely turned up. And so that's super important to keep in mind, because too often you think, oh, well, I mean, at least it's functional, at least the experience is sort of functional and we can use it, and don't really think about the speed and functionality that we would like to achieve and that we should be able to achieve when you're sort of just testing yourself and you figure, oh, this is so slow and complicated, this is the best that we're going to be able to get.
Meeting control,
I'm going to take a minute and
mute, stop
my share once again and take us back to the slideshow as we go. PowerPoint. And turn off the sound.
Question while
and
you're
hey,
going
yeah,
past.
let's go for
Could
questions.
you confirm
Absolutely.
What screen reader were you using during the demo?
I was using NVDA.
NVDA.
Yeah.
Cool. And is there any special keyboard, or can you talk more about your input method? Are you simply using a typical keyboard or something else?
I am absolutely just using a regular, normal keyboard. In my case, I'm very fussy about keyboards. I like the mechanical switches. So I have a kind of SteelSeries keyboard with the mechanical switches because I love them. I love good typing feedback. I'm typing 8 hours a day, right? But no, it's a completely normal keyboard. I'm a touch typist, and it's super important, I think, for at least screen reader users, because we use that keyboard so much.
Great. And for everyone else, just keep typing your questions. I'm making a list of them for when we get to the Q&A section. And I will ask all of them, or you will be called on to ask them. Thanks.
All right. Hopefully you have the PowerPoint back and you don't have screen reader sound. Assuming things are working.
It looks.
All right. So we've talked a lot about why to do it, done a little bit of a screen reader demo, kind of demonstrated, how the experience can be different, at least for a screen reader. All of those things that we've said hold for screen magnification, for Dragon Naturally Speaking and voice control, for switch systems, for all the rest. I focus on a screen reader because that's what I'm using tonight, and that's what I have here. But all of these things hold true. Now that we've talked about those, let's get into a little bit of the tips and kind of tricks of user testing and of involving real users in your accessibility testing, because a lot of companies want to do it, but unfortunately there are a lot of things that can go wrong in the various stages of the process, and a lot of reasons why you may not get the results that you're hoping to get. I mean, first of all, when you're recruiting, you need to be thinking about the accessibility of the engagement process. One particularly interesting engagement that I had kind of before I worked at Fable here, because of course, as a person with a disability, I've now had the privilege of being involved in accessibility testing from both sides of this. Is someone that was trying to recruit screen reader users to do some testing for them. And they had used a recruiting tool where the form fields were all unlabeled, and the forms were just inaccessible and couldn't be filled in, because that was just the tool that they used to recruit user testing. And so they hadn't really thought about, is this accessible? And so, they wondered why they weren't getting any recruits. But even when you find folks to test with, there's all kinds of stuff that people don't think about before you're even ready to think about what you want to test. There's non-disclosure contracts. There's contracts around payment. Too many times, it turns out these things are not accessible. And now, as a participant, there's like a big scramble to figure out, how are we going to get these contracts and NDAs and all this stuff that we need signed and processed, and background checks and all that stuff. A lot of testing will require VPNs. It will require security software. It will require, something on top of the testing process, whether it's screen recording software or meeting software. Is that software accessible? If you're doing in-person testing, not only is the location that you're testing in accessible, is it possible to easily travel to and from that location? Is it on a public transit or a bus route? And of course, is the compensation process accessible? If you are testing with real users of assistive technology, it is a learned skill. Testing is a learned skill. Use of assistive technology is a learned skill. Giving excellent feedback is a learned skill. And all of those skills should be appropriately compensated. And too often it's either, somebody saying, hey, will you please volunteer to do this work for us? Or, hey, will you come and do what basically works out to 4 hours of work and we'll give you a $25 gift card? So not only is it appropriate, is it accessible? And of course, then, as you have now thought about the process, you need to start thinking about what you're actually going to test and about the testing that you're going to run. When you're planning your time, it's a good idea to assume kind of time and a half for assistive technology users. In an ideal world, we would be able to accomplish every task just as fast as someone who wasn't using assistive technology. But of course, this isn't an ideal world, and the product that you are testing may well have accessibility barriers. So it's a good idea to sort of assume time and a half for any task that you want to perform and any testing that you want to do. It's also super important to understand the current status of your product, because if you are at the point where the automated testing that you have done shows that there's no alt text, no controls are labeled, no buttons work, things aren't accessible with the keyboard, it's going to be very difficult for me as a screen reader user to even understand the experience that you want me to be having. Never mind to be able to try and say, oh, well, this is how you should fix this. This isn't working quite right. This is how this other thing could work better. Because if you're at a really kind of poor stage where you have what we previously called that low-hanging fruit to fix up, it's going to be a lot easier for users of assistive technology to help you get from functional to an actual excellent experience if you're at least at a spot where they can understand what the experience is intended to be. And of course, recruiting is super important. You've got to figure out where and how you're going to recruit participants, and that can change depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, the best way to recruit is, of course, word of mouth. You know, if you've worked with people with disabilities before and they've had an excellent experience working with you, and you're looking for some more, they would be happy to, you know, tell their friends about working with your company, about the exciting things you're doing. But if you haven't done it before, then, you know, one strategy that is often very useful is to partner with trusted organizations, because, you know, too often it can seem like, hey, we'll pay you for, you know, this particular amount of work, and how do you get through, like, this isn't some kind of work at home scam, or this isn't something like that. And so really partnering with trusted organizations. Those trusted organizations can not only help you do some recruiting, but might actually be able to sort of help you walk through some of those beginning sort of tips for you to think about. Is your space accessible? Is your kind of tangential software and processes, are they going to be accessible? Things like that. And then, of course, after you finish testing, following up quickly is super important. Too often, people who use assistive technologies will sign up for some testing, and they'll give some feedback, and it feels like we're just shouting into a void. Nothing has changed. We haven't been heard. Where did all that good feedback we gave go? And so, if possible, it's always good to follow up and to say, hey, we've fixed things, we've improved things, etc. Of course, compensating quickly is super important, and, you know, sharing some of the results that you found with testers, because we're just as interested as you are probably in making your product accessible, in learning about the accessibility of your product now, and in helping improve and open more doors to people just like us. And so sharing some of those results can be a good way to keep people engaged. And of course, talking about any possibilities for future work, because accessibility isn't just a project that you do every 5 years. It's a journey, right? There's always new browsers, always new software, always new product releases, always new features. And so if you can start to build a community of folks that you test with and that you work with, then it makes your recruiting easier because you get that word of mouth. It means that there are trusted folks who know your processes and who know your product that you can come back to. And then, of course, once you have results, it's super important to figure out how to prioritize your results. There's a whole other presentation that could be covered in here about how to prioritize accessibility results. But one really good starting point that either if you're newer to accessibility or that a lot of companies don't think about is just task completion, because too often we're at a point where there is some barrier, whether it be a CAPTCHA or whether it be something that's not keyboard operable or something like that, that is actually preventing somebody from completing the task. And it's those that are your real barriers and that you can fix. And so if you think, hey, we noticed that, you know, screen reader users couldn't complete the sign up flow, figuring out why and fixing that is a really good way to prioritize things. The trouble with time is it's not a great focus. A lot of people who come kind of from the UX field and from user research fields are really used to thinking about time. And the problem with time is that for me as a screen reader user who's, you know, using my screen reader at 400 words per minute, versus, let's say, perhaps somebody who's using a switch system, which a switch system is a system that allows you to control your computer through the use of just one button, just one little switch. It breaks the screen down into grids and sort of cycles through them and lets the switch user narrow further and further down based on what they're looking to access. But the time that they would expect and require to complete any given action is, of course, going to be wildly different from the time of a screen reader user. So if you start trying to take time as a metric and, you know, average the times of various users of various screen readers on various platforms plus various other assistive technologies, you get to a point where it doesn't mean a lot. And so as you're working on testing with real users, one of the things that Fable has launched is our AUS, our accessible usability scale. It's an adaptation of SAS, the system usability scale, for some of you who have heard of that. And it's just a survey that assistive technology users would fill out after performing a particular set of tasks about their experience, that we've really thought about and that we've really made sure is targeted to best capture the experience of assistive technology users. And so that's another really great way that you can get some measurable metrics in order to take away from the user testing and the user research that you're doing. One other really important thing that a lot of companies are really starting to find out about over COVID, but that still takes a little bit of convincing sometimes, is the massive advantage of remote testing. A lot of people want to bring people into their usability lab or into your company's office or whatever it may be. And that isn't great for a lot of reasons. If you are able to do remote testing, you're able to involve a way larger variety of voices. As we've seen tonight, I mean, Accessibility New York draws people from not only all over the United States, but from all over the world. And odds are, unless you are in a very kind of particular industry, that your product is being used by people all over the country, all over North America, perhaps all over the world. And so if you can get into a rhythm of remote testing, you can hear from those voices sort of, across North America and across the world. You can also get experiences that are closer to the real world. As I had talked about previously, assistive technology is highly customized, highly configurable, created so that we can adapt it to suit our particular needs. But of course, if I go into your usability lab and sit down in front of your computer, now I don't have all of my settings. Now I don't have all of my custom configuration. And so the experience that I'm having is maybe as far away from the real world as the experience you'd have if you tested with a developer in some ways. Whereas if it's remote testing where someone can use their own equipment in an accessible, comfortable environment using the equipment that we own and that we already have and that we already have set up for us, those results that you're going to get are going to be way closer to real world, way more valuable. And of course, travel can be super difficult for people with disabilities, whether it's booking paratransit, whether it's getting access to a space, et cetera, et cetera. It can be hard. And of course, when you're working with someone remote, follow-up, all that follow-up is much, much easier. And so I'm conscious of time. So I'm going to close by talking just a little bit about Fable, because that's what Fable does. Fable works with users of real assistive technologies currently across Canada and the United States, but we will shortly be expanding beyond that. We have a pool of users that we have validated to make sure that they can offer excellent testing, excellent feedback, to make sure that they have the skills that you need to get the best results possible. At Fable, we support allowing you to test with screen readers, screen magnification, and alternative navigation, which by alternative navigation, we mean anything that would replace the use of a keyboard or mouse. So a switch system, a head mouse, Dragon Naturally Speaking, or other voice control software, things like that. We have participants across Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android who use all of these various technologies that we can help you test with. And of course, we then, if you sign up with Fable, handle contracts, payments, all that stuff. We make sure that our users are fairly compensated. We make sure that they have accessible, time tracking, that the payment procedures are accessible. All the contracts they sign with us are accessible. It takes away all of that administration that you would otherwise have to do around not only recruiting folks, but around, getting them signed up, getting their contracts signed, getting them paid, all that stuff. Fable takes care of all of it, as well as sort of ensuring, all the other stuff, the VPNs, the security software, the meeting software, everything we use at Fable, we've been able to make sure that it's accessible. And so, of course, we do that through the Fable platform, where we offer, fast user research and accessibility testing involving people with disabilities, because we've got all that recruiting done. We've got all that signing up done, and we've got a pool of users. And so that lets us turn around results in 2 days. Whereas if you're recruiting, I mean, you're going to start a project and you're not going to have results in 6 weeks, 7 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months. And we make sure that the feedback that you're getting is actionable. You can link it to WCAG guidelines because user experience is important, but you also sometimes need that linking. We make sure it's measurable, exportable, and shareable. And so, you know, that's what we do, is helping companies really work with users of assistive technology to get involved in the design, in the prototype review, in the research, in the ideation, in the development, and in the testing through all stages of that. So hey, I've gone a little bit longer than I'm sure we perhaps wanted me to, but why don't we go into Q&A and questions and answers? I'm sure there are quite a few.
Yes, there are. And thank you so much, Sam. That was awesome presentation. And there's tons of really positive comments also in the feed of just so many amazing resources. And I think especially the AUS scale that you mentioned had a lot of big response.
Absolutely. And hey, by the way, the slides that I have been using tonight are available on the Meetup page for this event. The AUS is linked in there as well. So if you didn't get a chance to write down that URL, go ahead and download the slides, and the link is going to be right there for you.
Great. So I have a queue of questions here. I'm going to be going from the ones that I have in my list, but also feel free to continue typing questions into the chat or onto the YouTube stream, and we will be monitoring those. Okay, so we have a first question for you from Kareem, or Karen. How do you solve for the differences in skill between different users of AT? For instance, someone who is adjusting to using it after a life change versus a power user who's used it all their life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that we think a lot about at Fable. And one of the things that we do feel is that accessibility and the use of assistive technology, is something that you learn. It is a skill, and it does need a little bit of training. And so for us, we do work with intermediate users. We do work with users who have picked up assistive technology after a life change. But sort of one of the things that we look for is somebody who's working with us to test our products needs to have enough skill with their assistive technology to understand if something is not working because they're not sure how to do something with their AT, or because of a flaw in the website or a flaw in the app. And that does take a little bit of training. And it's something that we think about a lot at Fable, like how can we make sure that everyone gets the training that they need, not only to work with us here at Fable, not only to do accessibility testing, you know, for us, but those skills are necessary to be part of the workforce, right? And so there's a certain minimum skill. Now, of course, you will see differences. Someone who perhaps is newer to their assistive technology, they might know how to navigate by heading, but they might not realize that X will take them directly to the nearest checkbox. And so sometimes they'll take a little bit longer to do things, and that's fine, and that's perfectly okay. And again, it really comes down to making sure there are no barriers that are blocking somebody from doing something, because an intermediate screen reader user should still be able to do everything that I can as an advanced screen reader user, even if they're doing it a little bit slower. Because some of the things that I do as an advanced screen reader user, such as trying to use optical recognition to recognize a CAPTCHA, or going into the accessibility or the developer console in my browser in order to, like, you know, activate some function on a div that isn't keyboard accessible. Those are things that nobody should ever have to do and that nobody should do, like, ever. I sometimes do them because, like, you know, the bill has to get paid or the form has to get filled out or the thing has to get done, but nobody should have to do that. And so, you know, if kind of a newer to intermediate user can't do it, then an advanced user, even if they can do it, is probably doing things that they shouldn't have to do to get through it.
That makes sense. All right, your next question is from Shalini. Can you talk a bit about cognitive disabilities? For example, for a user who might have trouble choosing between similar or many choices.
Sorry, my screen started talking at me. Can you repeat that again? I apologize.
Sure. This is from Shalini. Can you talk a bit about cognitive disabilities? For example, for a user who might have trouble choosing between similar or many choices.
So at Fable, we do not currently work too much with those users who have cognitive disabilities. And one of the primary reasons for that is because we are very focused on assistive technologies because it's easy to say, oh, this website was tested by, say, an NVDA user, or this website was tested by, say, a JAWS user. Whereas when you get into folks with cognitive ability challenges, it's not the same in that way. Nobody will experience the same cognitive challenge in the same way across two different people. And so the important thing there's a lot of tips and tricks out there that are available. There's a lot of great resources that talk about how to design best for folks with cognitive challenges. But the really important thing there is making sure that things are adaptable and making sure that things are easy to use. And testing with assistive technology will get you a lot of the way there. So for example, there's this sort of classic thing that you should never have a link that says click here, because as I'm tabbing through links, I'm just going to hear click here over and over and over again. And of course, the cognitive users are going to struggle with that same thing. It's a link with the same text over and over again. Where does it go and what does it do and what's different? But it is important to make sure to capture the kind of struggles and difficulties that folks with various cognitive challenges will have. But the challenge is really sort of figuring out how to kind of get that in a very replicable way when everybody will experience those challenges just slightly differently.
Great, thank you very much. All right, the next question is from Alice. How important is it to have JAWS installed on a Windows machine for QA testing? Would NVDA on a partitioned Mac serve as well?
My upfront answer is yes. NVDA, especially when it comes to the web, does an excellent job. NVDA, especially with Chrome and Firefox, does a really great job. And the nice thing about NVDA is when it does something that's sort of not according to the standards, it's all open source. And so somebody has probably already filed a bug about it on GitHub. And so if you're sort of thinking to yourself, I wonder, if this isn't quite behaving the way that it should, according to what the standards say it should do, there's that transparency, and you can go look it up and say, oh yeah, this is either known, or it's been fixed, or it's being fixed, or something like that. But that doesn't come up too much, because at least on the web, NVDA does a very good job. The place where you might want to make sure that you have JAWS is if you are using kind of a lot of custom apps that aren't on the web that you need to be testing, JAWS becomes more important. Or if you are using a lot of kind of these older business apps that need to be tested in Internet Explorer, because JAWS, I mean, you may not know this, JAWS actually stands for Job Access with Speech. And so JAWS is really laser focused on the corporate world, and laser focused on making sure Internet Explorer and like the old apps in VB6 that corporate still has to use will remain compatible. Whereas NVDA is kind of an open source project that's by users for users, and will sort of drop Windows XP compatibility and Internet Explorer compatibility a lot quicker than JAWS might.
Thank you. I'm going to take one question a little out of order just that relates to this, and it might be slight reiteration, but from Enrique, how about browser and screen reader combination? What's the preferred combinations or recommended combinations for browser plus screen reader?
I mean, I think you should be testing with what people are using. To be honest, I don't know if you're familiar with the WebAIM kind of screen reader study. They do a study on kind of screen readers and browsers every year, and that sort of tells you, you know, what are people on different platforms using? What browsers are they using? What are they preferring? And so instead of sort of me saying, well, this is what I use and I think this is what's best, the best thing to do is to go look at all of that data that they've got out there for you and see what folks are actually using according to the surveys that are being done and you know what's actually going on and saying, okay, well, this is you know 97% of NVDA users use this browser, so I better test that combination. You know, make decisions based on data rather than anything else.
That sounds great. All right, from Nathaniel, we have a technical question. Do we know much about how different screen readers read the AOM, the accessible object model?
We certainly know a lot about how NVDA does it because, of course, it's open source. You can go and consult the code. The thing about the accessible object model, and I'm not sure necessarily what that even is, because on Mac there is a very different set of object models, say, than there is on Windows. And you know, on Linux it's a whole different thing, which we won't get into, but even on like iOS and Android, the way that screen readers model accessibility information, the way that they will access the DOM, the way that they will sort of do things can be different from platform to platform. I know Microsoft is kind of in transition into their kind of UI automation way of doing things, that screen readers are slowly moving kind of away from things like iAccessible2 towards that on Windows. But like Mac has a whole nother different set of accessibility APIs. So I don't think it's necessarily all that useful to focus on exactly how the screen readers are doing what they're doing, unless you're doing something very, very technically involved.
Thank you. All right, next one from Aaron. Any suggestions on testing mobile apps remotely?
Yeah, testing mobile apps remotely can be a little bit of a challenge, right? Because you've got the mobile app, you've got the screen sharing, you've got the audio sharing, you've got all that that has to happen. A couple of things that we find works really well is if you have someone join, say, using software like Zoom on their computer, and then sort of you know, either use like screen mirroring or AirPlay if they're on the Mac platform. There's similar software for Android to actually move the screen and audio from their phone over to the computer and then share it on Zoom that way, as opposed to sort of trying to run Zoom and run everything on the phone, because that can get a little unstable, right? And then when they move away from Zoom and into the app, then you lose the video of them from their camera, because phones, you know, shut off video unless Zoom is the focused app, and things like that. So it can be good to, you know, have participants join on their computer and mirror the phone to the computer, or have participants join from both their computer and their phone, and then you can sort of do screen sharing on the phone and do, you know, camera and voice discussion through the computer. Those are a couple of different ways of doing it. And you know, if you happen to be working with someone who's on Mac and iOS, they can even, you know, hook their phone up to their computer with a wire, and then you don't even have the worries about Wi-Fi or anything like that.
Great, thank you. Next question from Kanu. What is the preferred sequence of accessibility testing? And they listed automated testing, manual testing, assistive technology testing.
I mean, as I said, doing that first pass with an automated test is super important. just to make sure that you know, it's not completely and totally broken. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should wait until later to get screen reader users involved, because or any assistive technology user involved, because the earlier you can get folks involved, the more accessible your product is going to be, because you're getting those voices and those results and that data in at the foundation of the product. So for example, at Fable, we'll have a lot of customers who will like involve us in prototype reviews before anything is ever built, so that they can start to think about like, oh, will this be an accessible design? Am I creating any barriers in the very design of the thing? And if you catch those at that point of creation, now you don't find yourself in a spot 5 months down the line where you have an inaccessible design that you have to somehow desperately retrofit.
Great. We've got 2 last questions, so we're not going to take any more questions, but I'm sure Samuel at makeitfable.com, if you have other questions, you can follow up with you, right? And
absolutely, get a hold of me by email. Love to answer them, love to chat, and that email address again is in the slides if you choose to download them.
Great. Okay, so next question from Julianne. How do you determine newer versus intermediate versus advanced power users? I think for AT. Is there?
Yeah, so at Fable, as we are bringing people on, we kind of have some tests to help us make that determination. And you know, we have folks sort of run through some websites that we know don't work great and see how they handle it and what they do and how they report issues, things like that. Because you know, at Fable, this is what we do, and we're able to kind of build that testing into our pipeline. Part of it is like the length of time that you've been using things is really important. Another part of it is really about like, if you are recruiting, a lot of people, if you ask them, will sort of have an idea of where they're at. If you were recruiting, another question I might consider asking is, have you had any training on your assistive technology, or are you entirely self-taught? And then maybe ask about the length of time that they've been using it. And those sort of things can help you get an idea, right? Somebody who's been extensively trained but using their assistive technology for 2 years might actually be more skilled than somebody who's been using it for 5 years and has never had any training to help them. That was kind of a non-answer, and I apologize, but there you go.
No, that was good. No, that was a good answer. That made sense to me. Last question from Alberto. So delivering a product by applying level A and AA from WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is that enough to enable a good scale of accessibility?
I mean, the answer is unfortunately no, because all A, AA, AAA tell you about is it's checklists and requirements for code. It is possible to make a AAA accessible website that is a miserable experience to use, right? Because the guidelines give guidelines about how things ought to be used. They don't necessarily require that things be used in certain ways, and they don't say anything about what the experience will be or what the experience should be. So you'll wind up with, okay, there's alt text and everything, and all of the headings are marked, you know, correctly, and there's landmarks, but like, does the skip to main content actually go to a useful place? You know, is the banner landmark being used the way that it should be? Is the footer landmark actually helping someone? Has the heading structure been created so that navigating by headings is actually jumping you to interesting, useful parts of the page? These aren't things that WCAG can tell you about. WCAG just tells you sort of how to use the various elements in a way that won't break accessibility. It doesn't tell you about how to create an accessible experience.
Wow, thank you so much. And I want to just, everyone here, really appreciate, there's tons of comments here saying thank you so much, thank you so much. And from me at Accessibility New York City, thank you so much, Sam, for the presentation tonight. It's a great presentation. Excited we're going to have this as a recorded stream for everyone to go back and watch. So if you missed something in the presentation, you can always go back to the YouTube stream and see the event. And we will also be posting a sort of cleaned up version with the captions and sort of a summarized post. We do that for all of our events. So we will be sending all of those things out. We thank everyone for coming tonight. Again, we want to thank our sponsors, Equal Entry and Adobe, for helping us have this event. We want to say thank you so much to Vera by Night, who's done the amazing captions for tonight's event. And we want to thank you so much to Jolie McPhee from the Internet Society of New York for the Zoom and YouTube streaming support and for making sure that we always have excellent recordings of our events. For those of you all that are still here, want to plug that our next event is going to be called I Heart CC, closed captions, why and how to caption videos folks love. And Meryl Evans, who's here in the chat and was here tonight, will be the presenter. That's going to be on July 13th, and we'll be publishing that to the Meetup page very soon. As always, stay tuned to the Meetup page, tell your friends about Accessibility New York City, and if you're interested in giving a presentation at Accessibility New York City, feel free to contact us on the Meetup page. We're always looking for new presentations. And again, final thank you to Sam at Fable for an excellent presentation tonight. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. All right.